מה נשתנה הלילה הזה מכל הלילות, מכל הלילות, שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים חמץ ומצה, חמץ ומצה. הלילה הזה, הלילה הזה, כולו מצה. הלילה הזה, הלילה הזה, כולו מצה.
Does that sound familiar to anyone? What is it? The 4 questions, exactly right. So for this Shabbat, Chol, HaMo'ed, Pesach, I thought we would share in a little bit of study about the Passover Seder, in which many of us partook on Wednesday night and perhaps Thursday night as well. And we'll start with the origin of the 4 questions in a text known as the Mishnah, which dates to the 2nd century. So take a look at the handouts that you received with your prayer book and follow along with me from Mishnah Pesachim. The child asks a parent, and if the child has insufficient understanding, the parent instructs the child to ask, "Wherefore, why, is this night different from all other nights? Because on all other nights we may eat both leavened and unleavened bread, but on this night only unleavened bread. Because on all other nights we may eat any kind of herbs, but on this night bitter herb. Because on all other nights we may eat flesh which is roasted, cooked, or boiled, but on this night entirely roasted. Because on all other nights we might dip once, but on this night twice." And according to the knowledge of the child, the parent instructs. Remember that very last line. We'll come back to it. The Seder is designed as a teaching ritual. Some scholars have suggested it was designed on the model of the Greco-Roman symposium. The unusual symbols, the matzah, the bitter herb, the dipping of parsley in salt water, can't help but inspire children to ask questions. It's all very interesting and fun, as it is supposed to be. And you should ask David's grandmother, Barbara, about some of what she has done to make the Seder come alive, including bringing the Sinai desert into their house. Now, why is the Seder intended as such a terrific teaching moment? Because the Torah tells us that's what it's supposed to be. 4 times the Torah commands us to teach our children about Passover. And I've included the citations on your sheet. Again, please follow along. Exodus chapter 12, verses 26 to 27. "And when your children ask you, 'What do you mean by this rite?' you shall say, 'It is the Passover sacrifice to Adonai, because God passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when smiting the Egyptians, but saved our houses.'" Exodus 13:8. "And you shall explain to your child on that day, 'It is because of what Adonai did for me when I went free from Egypt.'" Exodus 13, verse 14. "And when in time to come your child asks you, saying, 'What does this mean?' you shall say, 'It was with a mighty hand that Adonai brought us out from Egypt, the house of bondage.'" And finally, Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 20 through 21. "When in time to come your children ask you, 'What mean the decrees, laws, and rules that Adonai our God has enjoined upon you?' you shall say to your children, 'We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and Adonai freed us from Egypt with a mighty hand.'" For those of you who attended Seder, these quotations may also seem familiar. With which part of the Seder are they associated? The 4 children. That's exactly right. The 4 children. So now take a look at the collection of rabbinic writings known as the Mechilta, which was compiled about the 3rd century. Here we learn that the Torah repeats this instruction about teaching our children these 4 times because there are 4 different types of learners, each of whom must be taught according to the capacity and the interest that they bring. Follow with me. There are 4 types of children: the wise, the simple, the wicked, and the one who does not know enough to ask. The wise, what does this one say? What mean the decrees, laws, and rules that Adonai our God has enjoined upon you? That was Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 20. And you explain in turn the laws of the Passover and say that the company is not to disband immediately after partaking of the paschal lamb. There should follow epikomen, or as we say, afikomen. The simple, what does this one say? What is this? And thou shalt answer, it was with a mighty hand that Adonai brought us out from Egypt, the house of bondage. The wicked one, what does this one say? What do you mean by this right? Because the wicked one excludes himself from the group, do thou also exclude him from the group and answer, it is because of what Adonai did for me, but not for you. Had you been there, you would not have been redeemed. As for the one who does not know enough to ask, you should begin and explain, for it is said, and you shall explain to your child on that day. So almost 2,000 years ago, the rabbis drew from the biblical repetitions the answers that we might offer to different types of learners. And the text that we just studied from Mechilta is almost exactly what we find in the Haggadah, the Seder prayer book, which we use to this very day. Why is each answer appropriate for each child? Well, the wise child wants to understand every detail, as his question indicates. And so we explain all the laws right up to the search for the afikomen at the Seder's end. For the simple child, the details would be overwhelming. This one needs only the most important lesson, that of God's saving power. The wicked child, by saying, "What do you mean?" excludes himself from the community. Furthermore, he fails even to acknowledge God. And therefore we respond that had he been present at the Exodus, he would not have seen it as any sort of miracle. Interestingly, the Maharal of Prague, writing in the 16th century, doubted that any child could truly be wicked. Rather, he observed that sometimes learners feel excluded because teachers don't know their particular learning needs. And so we're reminded that we have to treat each student as an individual, even in the midst of a group. Finally, for the one who does not know how to ask, we can't wait for their question. Rather, we must begin to teach.